Hi Year 12s and welcome to this video which is about formal language. So we are on to Unit 3 area of Study 2. This is the first video in the series. Okay, on the next couple of slides we have the key knowledge. I'd like you to pause and read through this. This is taken directly from the study design and it's just a list of everything that we're going to go through as we cover area of Study 2. So read through that in your own time. When you're ready, come back to us. Here we have the key skills, so these are the things that you're going to learn how to do as we go through this area of study. So again, pause here, have a read, and then come back to the video. Okay, so we're going to start off with an introduction to formal language. As we know, we've just done informal language, so we're going to look at a few different things in these slides. So we're going to look at what formal language is used for and how we can actually identify what formal language is when we're looking at texts. Okay, first task is pause here for maybe 5 minutes and I just want you to jot down the difference between formal and informal language. So you might want to do it as a paragraph, you might want to draw up a bit of a table and have on one hand similarities between formal and informal language and then differences on the other side. It's up to you. I'd just like you to do a bit of a brainstorm before we continue on. Okay, so these are some of the features of formal language. So in morphology, we have some acronyms and initialisms are appropriate, but many aren't. So it really depends on the context, depends on what you're talking about. So for example, in science, you might have some abbreviations that are relevant, like DNA, for example. Sorry, not abbreviations, initialisms. But you also might have plenty of acronyms or initialisms that are not okay. So it depends on the context and it depends on what the acronym or initialism is. In terms of the lexis, we have a limiting of absolute terms. So we don't use things like everyone, always, constantly, all of those sorts of things. And you're also more likely to use modal verbs. So might, may, could, so on. In terms of semantics, you're less likely to use slang or colloquialisms or cliches or idioms. We strongly consider, generally in our society, in our language, they are typically considered informal features. Okay, in terms of the syntax, we have typically longer and more complex sentence structures and you're more likely to use the passive voice, particularly agentless passive voice. Back to lexis again, often Latinate vocabulary is considered to be quite formal. So these are words and phrases that have originally been derived from Latin. And also a consistent use of full words and phrases. So there's not really any shortenings. Again, depends on the context and it depends on the shortening, but this is a general kind of overall rule. In terms of discourse, you are less likely to have ambiguous language in a formal text. It's more likely to be cohesive and it's more likely to explicitly refer to aspects of the context like the audience or the setting or whatever that may be. Okay, in terms of formal texts, so naturally you guys are going to be asked to analyse different texts in this unit. These are the kinds of texts that you are likely to see. So for written, we have legal documents, bureaucratic policy and procedures, official documents, informational texts and literature. For spoken, we have speeches, lectures, oaths, liturgies, performances and monologues. This is not a comprehensive list. These are just some ideas of things that you might be asked to analyse in this area of study. Okay, I'd like you to pause on this text, have a read of it, and I want you to identify maybe 2 to 3 features or words or phrases in this text that you think are formal. Alright, so these are some of the ones that I've picked out. So we've got prosperous as an elevated lexis, that's quite a formal word. Say from whence you owe this strange intelligence. The syntax of that is really quite different to what we would have now, and now we would consider that formal. And we've got this kind of old-fashioned expression, speak, I charge you. Okay, so that will kind of come under semantics because we no longer use the word charge in that way anymore. Okay, this task is going to take you a little while, so you need to pause here. You need to go and find 3 formal written texts and 3 formal spoken texts. I know you're not really going to be able to find transcripts, so if you find 3 formal spoken videos of texts, that's fine. So it could be speeches. Maybe use that list of different text types that I gave you before to help you find your 3 written and 3 spoken texts. Then for each text, you need to write a short paragraph that identifies one formal feature in that text and one reason why this text requires a formal register. So what is it about the context of that text that means that that the author or the speaker has needed to use formal language? Once you've finished those paragraphs and you've found those texts, please come back to the video. Okay, so part 2 is stylistic features. So we're looking now at what features contribute to the formality of a text. Okay, these are the ones that we're going to go over today. So we've got pronunciation and accent, phonological patterning, affixation, lexical choice, connotation and denotation, and figurative language. Okay, so we're going to start with pronunciation and accent. There's a theory of speech production that suggests that speech ranges from distinct and clear to indistinct and unclear. It suggests that speakers will make as much of an effort to speak clearly as is required by their audience to understand them. In other words, in more formal speech, speakers will hold back on the natural reductive speech production processes that we've covered, like vowel reduction, assimilation, elision, so on, to ensure that the sounds are sufficiently distinct in order to be understood. So you'll notice, for example, in this video that I am pronouncing words quite clearly. I'm not rushing. I'm trying to avoid discourse particles and fillers like and Obviously, that's not always completely possible, but I'm trying to do those things because I know that the people who are listening to me speak require me to speak quite clearly and to enunciate my words, to pronounce them correctly and clearly, because you might not be familiar with this content. Also because you can't see me, you can't see my hand gestures or my facial expressions. So I know that you need me to speak more clearly than perhaps I would if we were just having a conversation about this particular topic in class. Okay, so that's the theory, is that pronunciation will change and will become more formal, more clear, depending on different contexts. So the better you know someone and the better you know the topic, the more indistinct and unclear your speech is likely to be. Formality in speech can also be indicated by accent. And in Australian English, we have 3 main accent varieties. We have broad, general, and cultivated. So broad is what we would typically consider to be a kind of bogan Australian accent. General is the typical Australian accent that the majority of us would use. And then cultivated is the sort of fancy Australian accent that you might hear older people use, or you might hear maybe on TV when they're trying to demonstrate a kind of fancy accent. Think about if you've seen Kath and Kim, Prue and Trude, they have a very exaggerated cultivated accent. So the use of one of these varieties, one of these accents over another, is governed by factors including the level of education that a person has, their gender identification. So women are more likely to speak with general or cultivated, and men are more likely to speak with general to broad kind of accent. Obviously that's a big generalization, but these are the patterns that we see in Australian English. The location, so whether you have grown up and learnt language in an urban or rural area, and then the stylistic requirements, for example, formal or informal situations, different topics, who you're talking to, all of those sorts of things. These accent varieties also have characteristic grammatical features. So for example, the closer an accent is to the broad variety of the spectrum, the more non-standard features that we see. So if we're talking in a prescriptive way, that means that the more broad and bogan you sound, the less likely you are to use good grammar. Okay, remember that's very prescriptive, so please don't write about it or talk about it in that particular sense, but that gives you an idea of the kind of match up between accent and grammar. Formality can also be indicated by different words that have socially marked pronunciation. So socially marked meaning we make judgments about the way that people say things. So for example, we have the word garage. Okay, so there's the French styled pronunciation with the soft G, garage. Okay, and then we also have the English styled pronunciation which is a hard J sound. So garage. Garage versus garage or garage. So we make judgments based on the way that people pronounce certain things. And you'll notice this in maybe the difference between South Australia and pretty much the rest of the country, how they pronounce certain words, like dance versus dance, France versus France. Those are socially marked pronunciations, and in the rest of Australia we kind of consider that a little bit fancy, whereas in South Australia that is considered pretty standard. Okay, so we're on to number 2 now, phonological patterning. So we have learnt about these features as well already in our study of informal language, but we're going to look at how these features can actually be used to achieve formality as well. Okay, so alliteration. It can be formal in quite a few ways. So it's often used in poetry. So for example, in a summer season when soft was the sun, and in persuasive speaking and writing. So partisanship and pettiness poisoned our politics. Okay, that's from Obama's speech. We know that that's quite likely to be quite a formal text. We also see it in other uses of what we would consider to be flowery language. So silky, smooth and sensuous. There is a wine for seduction. This is a wine for seduction as a symphony of taste sensations saturate the palate. Okay, so this has come from wine speak, which we know is or considers itself to be, I guess, a fancy sort of topic. And so we can see that the use of formal language here has been paired with alliteration to kind of elevate the piece of writing. Assonance used in a very similar way. I've just got some examples for you here. The very houses seem asleep. So this is from a poem. It beats as it sweeps as it cleans. Okay, so this is probably a little bit less formal, but this is an example of assonance for you. Okay, consonants. So this is taken from Hamlet, I believe. And we can see, again, very similar sort of effect. I'll read it to you so you can hear the consonants in this excerpt. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles. Okay, we can hear the repeated S sound, and it certainly gives some rhythm to the text, but it also doesn't impact its formal language. Onomatopoeia is generally considered an informal feature. However, it can be used in a literary and more formal context as well. Okay, so I've got this example from Pope. But when loud surges lash the sounding shore, the hoarse, rough verse should like the torrent roar. It's a bit of a tongue twister, that one. So in this example, we've got the hissing sounds imitating the sea smashing on the shore. So it's quite different to what we would consider to be, or what we would think of when we think of an onomatopoeia in general, like bang, crash, that kind of thing that's very, very informal. But we can have these examples of more formal uses of onomatopoeia as well. And then rhythm. So an example for you, out of childhood into manhood, now had grown my Hiawatha, skilled in all the craft of hunters, learned in all the lore of old men. So again, we would kind of consider it to be a more informal feature, but this is an example of how it can be used in a formal text as well. So these features particularly are more likely to be found in literature. Okay, and that's where we're going to find these examples of formal language using these features of phonological patterning. Okay, affixation. So morphological features can also indicate formality. In formal language, the morphology is typically classical in origin, drawing especially on hybrid affixes from languages like Latin and Greek. From the 16th century onwards, English was seen as inferior to the classical languages, so large numbers of morphemes were borrowed from Latin and Greek. Words which use these morphemes are more likely to be elevated, so we're more likely to consider these words that use the Latin and Greek affixes, we're more likely to consider them to be more formal. Okay, I'd like you to pause here and do this task. So I want you to go and find one prefix and one suffix that we use in English that originally came from Greek, and then one prefix and one suffix that we use in English that originally came from Latin, and add those into your notes, please. Okay, 4, lexical choice. So this can also be used to demonstrate the register of a text and create formality in it. Okay, so we're looking at what are the implications of using the following words. So we've got kingly, royal, regal, guts, courage, intrepidity, rest, repose, imperturbation. All right, so we've got, I would say it goes from kind of less formal on the scale to most formal on the scale, but all of those things technically have a very, very similar meaning. It's or if not the same meaning. So we can see how we can convey the same idea and the same concept in a text, but using different varieties or different levels of formality. Okay, so pause here and go to page 47 of the Meta Language textbook. That's the Orange Fox textbook, and do tasks 1 and 2, please. Once you're done, come back to the video. All right, number 5, connotation and denotation. So this still applies to formal language. To recap what they are, we have denotation, which is the referential meaning that is constantly associated with the word. Basically, we're talking about the dictionary definition here. Connotation is the effective meaning of a word, and this is these new kind of meanings are taken on by associations that might arise out of a speaker's beliefs or experiences. So basically, in a nutshell, these are the things that we associate with certain words. Okay, I would like you to read the following pairs of words and determine which one is more unpleasant. All right, so these pairs of words might have the same denotation, but the words stingy, pig-headed, terrorist, and cheap have much more negative connotations, and we would consider those to be less formal than the other words in that list. Okay, 6, figurative language. So these features we have listed here, we've already covered them. I'm not going to teach you what they are because you guys know this already, but I am going to show you, or we're going to talk about how they can be used in a formal context. So this is quite similar to how the features of phonological patterning can be used in a formal context. Okay, I would like you to please complete this task. This might take you a little while, but it's really worthwhile. You need to find at least one example of each of the features of semantic patterning, features of figurative language, in formal texts. So I would be looking at literature, poetry, political speeches and documents, legal documents, medical information, all of these kinds of things as potential sources. And what you need to do is you need to find in those texts, you can choose however many you like. You might be able to find all of them in one text, or you might need to find one different text for each of the different features. It's up to you. But you need to find an example of each one of these things in a formal context in a text of your choosing. Okay. Once you've gone through that task, these are the remainder of the activities that you need to complete for this set of slides. So we have the Canberra Bubble and Muslim Anzacs worksheet. They will both be available to you on the Google Classroom with this week's work. You then need to do activities 15 to 19 in Living Lingo, which is the blue book. So this is pages 132 to 134. And then in the orange textbook, you're going to do Apply Your Knowledge on pages 122 to 123 and then 119 to 121. If you would like to do some more work on this, you want to push yourself or you need a bit more revision, please do check your understanding on Fox, page 124, and Apply Your Knowledge in Fox as well, the orange one, page 127.